Well, good evening and welcome to Going Deeper. This is our monthly conversation where we, as per the name, dive deeper into the conversation that we've been having on Sundays, online and in the room throughout the series over the past month. And this is an opportunity for us to have a bit of two-way conversation. That's something that we don't get to do so much on a Sunday. But we love creating this space so that you can ask your questions, dig a little bit into the things that perhaps you've been thinking on over the series, and actually that we get to talk about some of the things that you don't get to cover when you do a 25-minute message, but that stuff that's under the surface that we might still want to talk about. And of course, over the past month, we've been talking about the stuff that goes on inside of us, specifically our emotions, as we've been going through this series called Inside Out. Martin and I, we're just on our lonesome tonight, Martin.
We're a select. This evening. Yeah. I love the way you said we're talking about our insights, our emotions, rather than like indigestion or stuff like that. Yes.
Yeah, that's January after all the
January series. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you guys have been following along with the series, we've had the privilege of also learning from David and Andy, who can't be with us this evening, but we're still going to talk about some of the things that they covered in their messages because they were really, really helpful. But it'd be great if you're watching in the chat. Let us know you're here and what's been sticking out to you. I've got an initial question for you to pose in the chat in a minute, but I was initially inspired to do this series based on one of my favorite films, Inside Out, which I alluded to in the first week. Have you seen that movie, Martin?
As with all kids' movies, I see bits of them. I tend to leave my kids watching it while I go off and do other things. But I have seen bits of it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm massively contesting the fact that it's a kids' movie. I need people in the chat to back me up that it's actually a deeply profound movie for every age group. Yeah. But yeah, if you're watching in the chat, I've got a question for you. And that's if you've been following along with this series, what has been something that you've learned either about yourself or about emotions as you've followed through this series?
I had created a banner and it's not there anymore. So let me stick it. You said it again. So what have
have you
learned about
yourself or about emotions?
It's how organised.
There we go. Right. Hey to Neil and Angie, and hey to Michelle as well. Lovely to have you with us.
Yeah, lovely to have you with us, watching me making mistakes. I'm just going
this through is live.
Spellings and show. There we go. What do you know about yourself or emotions this series? Do pop it in the comments.
There you go.
Yeah.
Martin, have there been things that have got you thinking in this series that perhaps you haven't thought about in a certain way before, or?
Yeah, I think it's thinking more about that emotions are okay. I think sometimes we can talk negatively about certain emotions, anger, fear, which was the week 2 and week 3 of our series. But actually, all emotions, they're not good or bad, but they are important. It's just how we deal with them, how we use them, how they affect us. That made me think. And actually, having said that, my children are at primary school, and they do a lot of work on primary school. There isn't a bad emotion; it's just a bad expression of that emotion. Emotions are okay, and they're encouraged to share them and talk about them. Which is what we want to encourage in this series, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. We talked in the first week about the fact that they are a response to what's going on in life. So feeling fear, even though it's never nice to feel fear, or it's never nice to feel sadness or pain, those things are, if they're responding to something that's actually happening, those are important, and we need to recognize them, address them, talk about them, work through them. But then there's that shift between acknowledging them and not necessarily pushing them down. You talked this morning about sort of when you push them in,
and exploding.
Yeah. But then also not being led by them. And I feel like that's the really interesting tension that we've been walking the line on through this series. Is I think more and more the way that we address feelings culturally, it's either, all negative feelings are really bad, or there's almost no such thing as a negative feeling. So just go with your feelings, go where your feelings lead you.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think it's so important. There's been a shift culturally that it's okay to accept emotion. And I guess as British people, we're supposed to have the stiff upper lip, which was that pointing back to sort of the early part of the last century, where you buttoned it in, you didn't talk about things. I'm thinking particularly of that generation in the first half of the last century, and they often didn't talk about the horrors that they'd seen maybe in the war. Whereas now we're very much encouraged to talk about things. But yeah, you're so right. It's such a fine line before we start just letting those emotions control us and either send us down wrong paths or prevent us from stepping into maybe what God has planned for us. If you're a follower of Jesus, those things that we're called to do, and fear in particular can really get in the way. Anger can ruin relationships. Yeah. If you just let them run amok, it's not very beneficial at all to anyone.
Yeah. So I wanted to throw this question out tonight. Do you think that emotions fundamentally are trustworthy? Can we trust our emotions?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I know what I was taught. In my 20s, I had a great church leader who shaped me a lot, and he talked about that particular issue. Can we trust emotions? I'm going to say what he said. Yeah. Or do you want me to say what he said?
It'd be interesting to know.
It would be interesting. Yeah. So he basically said you cannot trust your emotions. Yeah. So he was trying to say you have to, if you're a follower of Jesus, you trust the Bible. You trust what the Bible says, and you follow that. No, it isn't quite as straightforward as that. But that was basically his rule book. His guide for life was to follow the Bible. And if his emotions went against that, then you can't trust your emotions. And often our emotions do send us down all sorts of funny routes. You know, I've talked to people that were convinced that God was telling them to have an affair. It's like, no, I'm pretty sure he didn't, because the Bible's pretty clear on that one. But their emotions in the moment was telling them that was actually, it made perfect sense. It was okay. And I think our emotions can fool us into thinking in certain contexts and situations that, no, that makes absolute sense. That's the only course of action. That's the only response. I think very sadly, suicide is that, where people get to such a stage where the only logical response, and probably the response they think is best for everyone, is to commit suicide. And obviously that is not the case. So yeah, they're extreme examples, but I think our emotions are not to be trusted. But that makes it sound really negative. What do you think, Becky? That sounds like a real put down.
Yeah, I think it's kind of that when emotions begin to like define our reality, and they define our choices, and that we lean into them, we allow ourselves to be led by them, and we literally put all of our trust, you know, maybe not consciously, but we go, right, this is where this feeling is leading me, and I'm like, this is kind of all I can see, the feeling's all I can see, so I'm going in that direction. But of course, we don't want to say, oh, like that we need to kind of brush aside what those feelings might be telling us, because feelings can teach us things, can't they? They, you know, if I'm feeling angry, I need to pay attention to that, because that's actually going to teach me something about, like, maybe there's something that I'm seeing. I think it actually, in faith, I think feelings can be very instructive. And I've certainly found this in my faith journey, that if there's certain things that I'm feeling, particularly for me, fear has been a big one.
Yeah.
If there are certain things I'm feeling fearful about, that's kind of instructs me and teaches me about what are the things that I'm not believing about God currently. What are the things, where are the places where I'm not trusting God, which means that fear is taking a lead rather than God being the one who's kind of leading the direction of my life.
Yeah, I think there's that passage where it talks about not being slaves to fear. We sung a song about it this morning. We sang about it the other week as well. And it's that slavery, when we become a slave to certain emotions, that's an issue. And like you said, that communicates something to us about actually what is it we're struggling? What do we need to sort out? And it's good to explore our emotions, isn't it? Okay, if I'm feeling fear about this, well, why is that? What is that? I mean, I suppose that's what you do with a counsellor. I've never been to a counsellor. Not there's anything wrong with going to counsellor. I think it's a great idea. In fact, this morning I advocated it. I just haven't actually been to one. But I guess that's something that you start to do, is explore, why do you respond this way? Why do you feel this way? And so rather than being led down the garden path by our emotions, actually we're using them to instruct us and help us make good, wise decisions. That's got to be easier said than done, because if the stronger the emotion is, the more likely it is to overwhelm all senses, I guess.
Yeah. I think for me, it's often been a case of, and I'm no counselor at all, but it's often been a case of realizing that there is actually a reason. Sometimes you can feel something and it's very, very hard to pin down why you're feeling it. And so you sort of, that hopelessness that you were talking about this morning, you sort of give up hope that you're going to be able to make your way out of that feeling. But actually acknowledging that there is probably something going on. There is some cause somewhere, something that you might be able to pin down and get some clarity on, that can help you to sort of it's like sort of renewing of your mind.
I mean, obviously there are some things like clinical depression and things like that, and various mental illnesses where counseling is a help, but there are some things which need to be sorted with medications. We're not necessarily talking about chemical imbalances in the brain and stuff like that, but we are talking about those emotions that can so often hold us back, but actually if we learn to manage those and study them and talk about them, I think we can really benefit from those. You said the one for you, this series was maybe fear. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
So certainly for me, fear has been something I think I've particularly, it became more of a feature in my life when I went away to university. And coming back to what I was just saying, I think, that's not completely out of the blue. There are reasons why that happens, because you're suddenly, out on your own, you're away from your parents, the stability structures that you used to have. You've got a lot of pressure on, and you're trying to make friends and figure out who you are and all sorts of different things. So I think since university, I think there's something to be said for, once you start in a certain thought pattern, it can sort of take hold of you in a way. You become more disposed to worrying. You become more predisposed to thinking about worst case scenarios and that sort of thing. So for me, that's been a journey of actually to go to the extreme. And I think David did this really well in the week on fear. For me, it's been a case of really addressing those worst case scenarios, and rather than just saying, oh, well, that's fine, it will never happen, so it's silly to worry about it. And you were talking this morning about 24 hours in A&E, and it's not nice to watch it because you don't want to think. And the way you would usually calm yourself is by going, oh, well, that won't happen to me. But I think what I've had to go through with dealing with my fear is actually going, okay, if something like that did happen, what do I actually believe, and what difference does faith actually make if the worst happened? What do I believe about that? What do I believe? Do I believe God's there for me even if that happens? And working through even those worst case scenarios. And certainly I've had to do that in community, because you don't want to go down that thought process by yourself.
I mean, I think you're right. I think most of the time we want to just nip it in the bud. Like, no, I'm just going to not think about it. That's how we respond, isn't it? Because we're so fearful of following going down that road, and we're fearful of how it affects us. And maybe we need that courage and that assurance and that support to know, actually, no, this is a good thing to explore this. I may be fearful about that, but actually unless you talk about it, unless you work through it, you're never going to move on from that. I think it's interesting. You talked about, it seems natural when you go to uni and you leave family and stuff like that you start to feel fear and anxiety. Actually, it was the opposite for me. So I was very anxious as a teenager, and actually going to uni knocked that out of me in some respects.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it's still a factor, but a lot less than it ever was. But who knows? I think these things suddenly can get you when you least expect, particularly if you are stressed or tired, overworked, which we often call burning out. I think that's when those things start emerging again, and that needs to be a warning sign that something needs to change.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, you said it was fear and anxiety. For me, it's anger. And I know that when I'm angry, often it isn't necessarily the situation I'm responding directly to. It's the stuff that sits behind it. And it's usually because I'm worried or stressed anxious about something else, which for me comes out in anger.
Sure.
Fight or flight. Some people will run away. I tend to.
Yeah. So, which is why it's great to do a series like this, because we're being proactive about actually talking about these things and keeping our emotions in check. David's made a really really helpful comment in the chat. It said that money is a good servant but a poor master. Perhaps emotions are similar, good to pay attention to, but not too great if they become your master. That's it, isn't it?
Yeah. Thank you, David. See, David, we can't have you on the panel because I think you're on call this evening, but thank you for tuning in and commenting. Any other more pearls of wisdom you can give?
Send them our way. I wanted to pick up, Martin, on a comment that you made this morning that really struck me.
What did I say?
No. I thought it was really, it really stopped me in my tracks. You talked about whether in church life we've made sadness an unofficial sin. Do you want to talk a bit more about that? I thought that was such an interesting comment.
I think it's maybe an understanding that if you have faith, you trust God, which is a sign of a good, mature follower of Jesus, then you should be full of that joy that the Bible talks about, that you shouldn't feel sad because you have that hope and you're secure in your faith. And therefore to be sad shows that your faith isn't that strong. I'm not actually talking about our church. And I talked about Joel Osteen, who's, I guess, verging on prosperity gospel.
Yeah.
And prosperity gospel is very much about positive thinking, positive praying, and about focusing very much on the things you want and praying against the things you don't want. And sadness is in that kind of worldview, sadness is very much something you do not want. You want joy, not sadness. I think what I tried to bring out at the beginning of this sermon was that we need both, and both are not mutually exclusive. Actually, they work together quite well, sadness and joy. So I think often in our churches we forget that, and we expect people to be able to cope. It's a bit like saying to someone, you haven't been healed because your faith isn't strong enough. And we tend to think, oh, that's really bad. But we can sometimes think that. And I think we can sometimes think that about if someone's struggling with their emotions, then there's something wrong with their faith. It's a bit like that, taking that verse, there is no temptation too strong that we can't escape from under it. And we think, well, those people are given into temptation and their faith's not strong enough. Actually, it's not quite that simple and straightforward. And the more black and white we are, the more unforgiving we can of people that seem to display what we would deem to be negative emotions. So I don't know if does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. It's interesting that the woman you quoted this morning, Dr. Kate Bowler.
Yeah, not Fowler, as I
not Fowler. So she's written, one of the books that she's written is called Everything Happens for a Reason and Other Lies I've Loved.
Yes.
And that's very much coming back against this. She basically makes the case that actually the prosperity gospel, we know of very extreme examples, and we think of preachers who make lots of money off of it, but actually that the prosperity theology, as in the way that we think about God and how faith works, is actually more widespread than we realize, and that often we find ourselves thinking that actually God is supposed to make life better and make circumstances go a bit easier and make sure that all our ducks are in a row and we have good finances and good fortune and good health. And obviously her being somebody who's living with cancer, has had to do a lot of unpicking of the ways that she's thought about that, and the fact that God, having God in your life means that happiness will be easy, and that I love that Jesus, the first thing that Jesus says in his most famous sermon is, "You're blessed if you're mourning." And that sermon is, we talk about being blessed as being, having lots of good things, and everyone's healthy in my family, I'm so blessed, and I'm so blessed I've got this job. And Jesus said, you're blessed, God is close to you when you're sad, you're blessed when you're poor in spirit. And I think that's very powerful.
So often not often, but I have heard it when something goes wrong. So I was talking this morning about, we try to manage ourselves into a good life. If we do all the right things, we save our money, we do go to church, then we're going to have a good life. So when something hits us from the unexpected, something that's devastating, then we ask those questions: what have I done wrong? Why is God punishing me like this? Because our faith tells us that if we're good, we get good things. If we're bad, we get bad things. And there's an element of that, just a little bit of an element of that in the Bible. But actually, the reality is, the stuff happens. And there isn't necessarily a reason behind it, or not one that will ever know. And that just because something bad has happened to you doesn't mean that it's because you've done something wrong or God is punishing you. It's just the rubbish, sinful, fallen world that we live in, that these things just come out of the blue.
That's right. Jen's put in the chat, I think it can be difficult to be sad or struggling when people are used to you being strong, happy, or if you're in a position where people turn to you for support. That is so true, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. And I think, it's, if people expect you to be in a certain way, you try and act that certain way, because you don't want to let them down, or maybe you like that particular image that people have of you. And I think most of us want to give off a strong, competent exterior. I don't want to be a bubbling wreck, blubbering wreck, not bubbling. I don't want to be either, really. And the more we show what's inside, turmoil on the outside, the less people think of us. One
of the things, it's a more extreme example, but one of the things I'm always struck by when you go through safeguarding training, of how to respond if somebody makes a disclosure to you, is they always talk about not giving off the impression of being shocked.
Yes.
And I think there's something to be said for that, for when it comes to us being good listeners and people who are approachable when other people are struggling or feeling, especially people who are often very bubbly or whatever, that we're not people who are shocked by sadness or shocked if somebody says, actually, I'm like, no, normally I would give you a list of all the wonderful things that are going on. Actually, today, this is rubbish. Absolutely, this is rubbish and this is rubbish. And that we're not people who are taken aback by that, but that we're ready to be like, that makes sense. It makes sense that you would feel that way.
It made me think of a book of the Bible called Job, which basically got a guy called Job, but everything goes wrong in his life. And he's obviously very sad and upset. And he has a group of friends that sit with him and just are there with him. And they're great until they open their mouths. And then they basically chastise him for being sad and being angry with God. And being upset. And I think we've got to be so careful in those situations that when we open our mouths, because that's when we're liable to say something really stupid. And actually, sometimes we just need to be with someone.
And thinking about the conversation that you're opening up as well, I often find that I ask somebody, how's your week been? And if you ask, how's your week been, like that, you're not creating a space for somebody to say, oh, this has happened. My life, something's blown my life to pieces. If so it's actually thinking about
please don't say anything negative, because I'm not interested.
We're just doing small talk. So thinking about how do we become better listeners and better asking questions about that enable somebody to actually respond with what is actually going on.
And that's a matter of time, isn't it? I said this morning, you can't do that on the street. You bump into someone, it's not always appropriate to suddenly offload every single thing in your life. And that's where relationships and time and meeting up with someone, you might spot that there's, they don't seem quite happy, or you've heard something went wrong. Well, rather than as they're walking into church asking them how they are, maybe that's the time to meet up with them for a coffee, or give them a ring and just say, look, how are you? And that's much more appropriate, and also it makes them hopefully much more likely to open up about something, rather than being surrounded by loads of people and busyness and time short. So we need to really be careful with how we ask that question.
Definitely. Really good question in the chat from Neil and Angie. Where should we look to self-help, e.g. take a breath, count to 10 when angry, etc.? And when should we look to Jesus to change us when struggling with our emotions?
See, I love David's response. Says, I find with me, I need to realize that without Jesus' help, I can't take a deep breath or count to 10.
That's a good response.
I think for me, and it's the same with, if you're ill, you go to the doctors and you ask people to pray for healing, and you pray for healing. You just chuck everything you can at it. And it seems nonsense to me to have an issue with anger or anxiety or fear, or whatever, and go, okay, either I'm just going to pray for it, or I'm going to go and ask the doctor and see what they think. I think you just need to chuck everything you've got. We're blessed in this country with so much resources for the NHS, so we should use it. But also, hopefully, if you're fortunate enough to be blessed with friends and people, then you should go to them. And also, if you follow Jesus and you need to listen to Jesus really and pray about it. I used to remember when I was at high school, I'm guessing this is the same for you, Becky, although there is a little bit of an age difference between us. Receiving when I was 11 years old, the Little Red Gideon's Bible. Did you get one of those?
Yeah.
We did. We went to the same high school, so we got it in the same place. And at the beginning, it's got a little section where if you're struggling with all of these things, and it lists a whole load of emotions or situations, then here's some passages you can turn to. And I think that's really useful to us. I think it's far better to use that as our starting point, particularly if you're on the internet. There's so much stuff out there. When I started writing this sermon on joy and sadness, my first port of call, because I was just interested, was, okay, what does the world say about how do we deal with joy and sadness? And just to see their list of things. It's all very much about positivity and positive thinking. But actually, we should be putting more of our trust in what the Bible says than what self-help says. But having said that, I think there is so much to learn practically from self-help, because the Bible is great, but maybe doesn't have quite all those practical ways of doing it. It might be a little bit more difficult to draw out, whereas some self-help, you can go straight away to a website that says, take a deep breath, count to 10, etc.
I think I find it helpful not to think of those things in two completely separate categories. That God gave me breath. He gave me my physicality. Is that there's nothing non-spiritual about my physical form and doing things to slow my heart rate, slow my breathing. You know, like emotions do have physical repercussions on us. And, you know, I do those things with God. And the most important thing about it is that you're not alone. And self-help is, I don't know if I could do it when I'm feeling very fearful. I really need to know I'm not alone. I'm safely held by a loving God. So yes, I'll take deep breaths, but thank God I'm not taking those deep breaths alone, that I'm not alone in that moment, and that God's with me. And I think that sometimes we can separate things out and think, right, I'll do some sensible NHS things and I'll do some spiritual godly things. And God, you know, all the wisdom, the best wisdom of the NHS is the wisdom of God ultimately, as in, you know, he's wired us to have intelligence and be able to think and study and understand the human form that he's given to us, and what's healthy for our bodies is what God has designed.
And I think we ignore our physicality at our peril. And we can get all spiritual about certain things, but actually physically we need to look after ourselves. Jen says, are there Christian self-help books where they give you practical tips but also point you back to Jesus?
Good question.
Hopefully we are doing that in our sermons. That's why we chose a sermon series about emotions, because we want to offer practical advice that is helpful and useful that you can go away and apply, but also point back to Jesus as well. And actually, we did in January this year, we did the John Ortberg, a series based on John Ortberg's book. Remind me what it was, Becky?
Everybody's Normal Until You Get to Know Them.
Yeah, and it's those sort of books by people like John Ortberg in particular, but there's plenty out there which are both practical but have a foundation in the Bible and draw their practical points from the Bible. Which is why I said earlier, sometimes it requires a little bit more work with the Bible. It's not quite so obvious, which is where these books come in really useful, because the Bible is full of all kinds of wisdom that we to apply to our lives. It's useful for teaching and rebuking and so on and so forth. But sometimes it's not quite so obvious. So we need that help to draw that out. But it's there.
Yeah, I'd recommend, there's Max Lucado, Lucado. His books are very good, and he's done things like daily reflections and things. He's done a lot about anxiety and worry. And then also Dr. Henry Cloud, who is, it's a faith perspective and a psychological perspective meshed together. But I'm thinking of them. There's a beautiful, I want to say Psalm, apart from I'm not 100% sure whether it's in the Psalms, but I think it probably is, where it says, I look to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. And I think coping strategies for dealing with when emotions are getting on top of you are important. But when it comes to actually at the baseline of your life, who's going to help you walk through and walk out of the emotions that you struggle with? You don't want that person to be yourself, because yourself is the person who's in the mess in the first place.
Just going around in circles. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. So, and I often think of that Psalm when
Psalm 121.
There you go. Did you just Google that, Martin, or do you know that off the top of your head?
No, I knew that off by heart.
That's beautiful.
Yes, I did just Google that one. Thank you, Google.
Yeah. So, and thank God that's where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth, the one who holds it all, not my help comes from myself.
Yeah.
Because that would be disastrous.
Jen, who asked that question, actually suggests one particular book, which I do remember having. We've had quite a few copies of it. It's Joyce Meyer's Battlefield of the Mind. And that's about, our thought life and where that takes us. So that's something. And then with that particular book, there's daily readings based on it, and there's lots of way to access the teachings in that book. Yeah.
And I should say, because through Hawley Baptist Church, we get this amazing access to Right Now Media.
We do, yes.
Which is a whole library of video content.
Yes.
And we have got a little playlist on Right Now Media. If you have it through Hawley Baptist Church, we've got a playlist with some sessions on different emotions. And after this video, I can't do it right now because I can't multitask, but I will put a link with this video on how you can access that media library through Hawley Baptist Church for free.
And I think that's Right Now Media is really useful because I know, because I do a lot of research for my sermons, there's a lot of rubbish out there disguising itself as Christian teaching, on YouTube and stuff. So Right Now Media is curated videos and created videos by Right Now Media of really good, strong biblical teachers, and you're going to get some really good quality stuff.
Definitely.
There. So I would, some of us read books, some of us watch videos, some of us listen to podcasts. If you watch videos, and you want to go a bit deeper with your Christian faith, obviously watch Going Deeper with me and Becky. But actually, Right Now Media is something that's really good to sign up for. The church has paid for it, so you don't have to. So that's all free for you to access. So, Becky, give the details for that, and or you can get. Yeah. Will that be on Facebook as well?
Yes, that is on Facebook as well. I'll repost it. Yeah. Can we change tack a bit for the last few moments? We've talked quite a lot about. So we've talked quite a lot about more sort of on the sadness, fear. It'd be cool to talk more about anger, because I think Andy's message on anger was really challenging. I thought it was excellent. And you've mentioned, Martin, that would be, if there was an emotion that you would say, actually, that's the one that I have to do some work on, that would be that one.
Do you reckon that's a male thing? That be a stereotype?
I feel like I'd get into all sorts of trouble if I responded to that question.
Let's not go there. Anyway, carry on.
I mean, my parents would tell you that the child they had the most trouble with tempers with was certainly me. So I don't know. But so Andy, in his message, he gave a really interesting sort of prescription for anger, which was grace, as in he defined it as unmerited favor, doing good even when good perhaps feels as though it is not deserved. So my question is, does being a Christian make you a pushover?
Does being a Christian make you a pushover? See, Jesus got angry. And later on in the New Testament, in the letters, it talks about, in your anger, do not sin. So there's anger, and there's sinful anger. I think sometimes we can get the two confused. But actually, I see, for me, I think it's about justice. And I think often Christians get angry about things done against them, and they get cross about unfairness, when actually we should be getting cross about wrong things done to other people, particularly the vulnerable in our society, those who are being ostracized for any particular reason, sexuality, gender, ethnicity, anything like that. Those are the sort of things we should be getting angry about. Poverty, for example, should we get angry about? And that sort of anger drives us to do something about it, I think. But when it becomes against us, I think we need to be a bit more gracious. And then that raises that question, are we a bit of a pushover? If we turn the other cheek, as Jesus recommended or taught, are we actually a pushover? And that's a really tricky one, because none of us want to be a pushover. And the easiest way to not be a pushover is to react and get angry and push back. And are we able to push back and not be angry? What do you think, Becky? Let's turn that question back to you.
Yeah, I was I've been thinking about it since Andy's message. And Jesus was not a pushover or a doormat. That's Jenny's comment in the chat. Very good.
Put on there,
I was thinking about it, and I was sort of thinking about how anger, Jesus does this teaching about turning the other cheek, which it's immensely powerful. And when people have applied it, extraordinary things have happened. Like that was sort of a governing principle for Martin Luther King. And the way that they protested was not to return violence for violence, but actually to do good to the enemy in effect. But then there was also that wasn't the only thing that the civil rights movement did. The civil rights movement also proactively made strides to make a change. And I was thinking about Jesus does the teaching about, if someone slaps you on the cheek, turn the other cheek also. But he also talks about if you have a grievance with somebody, if somebody sinned against you, he talks about going and approaching them, and he talks about how to do that. So it made me think that maybe Jesus is teaching us something about the reaction.
Yeah.
And what's the best way to react to actually, try to make our default when somebody does wrong to us to actually give good back. But then there's also this proactive, more measured at another time, maybe. So not in the moment.
Yeah.
But to go to somebody and say, actually in these ways, you have caused me hurt. And Jesus seems to he gives people ways to do that, doesn't he? He talks about how to do that within the church. So maybe it's about that, being purposeful and thinking about how do I put things right? Rather than that reaction to do bad because somebody did bad to me.
Yeah, I remember hearing it said that if you're carrying a glass of water and someone bumps into you and the water spills everywhere, says you're not responsible for someone knocking into you, but you are responsible for what's in your cup. And actually, because someone can do something to us and they knock us and we're so full of anger and stress and anxiety, it all comes out and it just goes over everyone and everything. And that's our responsibility. And I think whether or not we are a victim or a pushover, whether or not we blow up or be angry, whether or not we cower, that's more about us than it is about what's being done to us, I think. And it's that response. How do we respond in a way which isn't an explosion? We talked about imploding, exploding, and actually our emotions can cause us to explode, which does damage to other people, and that's not a good thing. So I think you're right, Becky, that Jesus gives us tools in order to not be a pushover, but not to explode and just lose it with loads of people, or implode and really get fear and anxious and become cowering victims. None of those are good responses. And I don't think we're called to be a pushover.
And then saying all that, David, an absolute corker in the chat. I have often wondered if, as the song says, Christ took the fall and thought of us, it may not necessarily be a bad thing to be pushed over.
Yes. Yeah. If we look at Jesus's example, he looked, from all intents and purposes, like a victim. And from a worldly point of view, and as far as all his disciples, family, and friends were concerned, he was a victim. And he was at his most powerful at that lowest point. So we need to maybe redefine biblically what that looks like.
And that comes around to that sort of where you left us this morning, Martin, about that having a purpose. Because the reason, Jesus, he took the fall for us, but he did it for us. There was a reason and a purpose. And I find it so interesting that suffering and weakness are so central. If you read the New Testament, all the letters and the Gospels that are written about Jesus and after Jesus, weakness and suffering is it's almost it's glorified. It's held up, and it's completely central. And I think so many of us have lost that, and so certainly lost that. I mean, that's never been the case in society, in wider society, but I think many of us lose that understanding from our own faith, and we lose it from our churches, not from, I don't think we have lost that in Hawley, but I think that happens in Christian culture as well, that we lose this idea that suffering and weakness is actually integral to our faith. And the reason that it's not hopeless, and the reason that it's okay to be pushed over, is because we have a purpose. And that, I loved that verse you shared from Paul this morning, that Christ is preached either way, and that whether I'm really happy, whether I'm pushed over by life and deeply sad, if my life could tell a story about who God is, then that's the purpose I want my life to be about, not to be happy, which is, I think, as I reflect on this whole series, the fundamental kind of the thing that's different when we talk about our emotions is that many people, their life becomes a pursuit of happiness. It becomes, the purpose is happiness, which means anger, sadness, fear, they are all catastrophic because they get in the way of our happiness. But we have a purpose that is higher than happiness. Here endeth the sermon.
Here endeth the sermon. That was a very good way of drawing that conversation to a close. So that was perfect. Thank you, Becky. You almost thought that you put the series together.
There's so many great comments in the chat that we haven't had a chance to get around to, but thank you so much for being so engaged. What's coming up next, Martin?
I was about to ask you the same question, Becky, because we're approaching Christmas.
Indeed.
And I'm rather excited and perplexed by our new teaching series, which is based on songs from the films Frozen 1 and 2.
Frozen. You'd think we love Disney Pixar.
Yeah, so you had Disney Pixar with Inside Out, but we didn't refer to it that much. This is going to be very obvious, because not only will we be preaching on or responding to, biblically, some of the stuff in these films, but actually we're going to be performing some of the songs as well. So if you come on a Sunday morning, you can sing along with 4 songs that we're going to be performing. And if you're online, at least the first 2 will definitely be online, because we recorded them, didn't we, on Thursday night?
That's so right. And I have to say, having had a preview, oh my goodness, you must be there online or in the room. It is amazing. Yeah.
Big thank you to Lizzie and Elise, who are our singers for those 2 songs. So yes, really looking forward to that. But that's just the teaching. We've got so much other exciting stuff happening over the Christmas period. And one of my favorite things that we do at Hawley Baptist Church is on the 11th of December in the afternoon. I think it's 4 o'clock. 5 p.m. Sorry, 5 p.m. is Carols in the Car Park, where not only will we be singing carols, but we will be doing crafts. We'll be doing crepes. Is it, those French pancakes? We should just
indeed.
Roasted chestnuts, hot dogs, candy floss, hot chocolates. We can go and have your photograph taken in the stable dressed as a wise man. There's loads of stuff happening.
Wow.
And hopefully the snow machine will be working again this year, which is always fun, and it really makes it look Christmassy. So I am really looking forward to that.
How much have people got to pay to experience all these amazing things, Martin?
How much do they have to pay? Well, if they can give me money, but actually it's free. So it's of no cost to you whatsoever. So you can come and just experience some Christmassy cheer. There's mulled wine as well. I forgot to say that. That might be a game changer for some people. And it's all free. We just want to bless our community. So just come along, 5 o'clock. It'd be easy to spot. We're in the car park. You don't even have to enter the building, although toilets are available. So, we're looking forward to that.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you, Martin. Thank you to Andy and David as well for some fantastic messages throughout this series. And thank you to you guys who have engaged on the chat tonight. You've been brilliant. And if you have any further questions, you want to continue this conversation, you can email gotquestions@hawleybaptist.org.uk. And feel free to comment below on this video if you've watched on demand as well. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. Enjoy the rest of your evening if you're watching in the evening. If not, have fun.
God bless you. Bye.